Welcome to this week's episode of Talking Therapy. Talking Therapy is the companion podcast to my YouTube series In Therapy, where we follow brave participants on their real-life therapeutic journeys with me. This is all part of my mission to break the stigma around mental health, chronic illness, the reality that we all struggle in life. We all go through challenging times. The more that we ask for support, the more that we have the tools and strategies that can help us, the easier those times ultimately can be. And on this week's episodes, I'm going to be exploring some themes from the recent episodes of In Therapy. I talked to Katie in a recent episode about this idea of get into jail free cards. I'm going to talk about what they are and the impact they have and what you can do about them. We're also going to explore a bit about the inner child in this episode. This is a theme that's starting to become a regular one in some of the work, again, that I'm doing with Katie. I'm also going to answer some of your questions as well. And a reminder, if you want to ask a question for Talking Therapy, there's two ways you can do so. Firstly, you can post below any episode of In Therapy on my YouTube channel. Secondly, you can email hello@alexhoward.com. And it really is your questions that I think bring this podcast alive. One of the things that I really like about this podcast is it allows me to feel a bit more connected to you as an audience, but also that hopefully you don't feel that you're just passively viewing these episodes. I think it's very personal and it's very emotive, particularly last week's episode with Katie. I felt that was the deepest session that I think we've shared on In Therapy, where it was the closest approximation perhaps to what happens when therapy is really happening in the clinical room. I really admire Katie for her courage, her willingness to be seen in that way. But just watching those episodes, I'm mindful can be, in a sense, quite a lonely thing. And I want it to feel collaborative and that you're part of a supportive community. So please do, if you've got questions, please do reach out to us. So I talked to Katie about this idea of get into jail free cards. And part of the homework that I set her was to go away and to start to build some awareness around those. Here's a little clip about that.
Tell me what you discovered.
Well, one of the biggest ones was I don't deserve nice things. I don't deserve to devote time to myself. That was kind of a really big one for me. I'm not on the same wavelength as the rest of the world. I'm not a good mother. That's a really huge one for me. And I said in the vlog, that's not so much a belief, it's a fear. It's a huge fear that drives my whole life. And then this is what I can feel, sort of the emotion coming up now, because all I ever wanted was for my kids to feel safe and secure and loved. And I would I'd die for them, you know. I know the tools are there, but it's why I have this resistance to doing it for me. I can't waste that time on me because there's too much to do, or there's you know that and like when you say it, if you see it, you don't have to be it. I've seen that for the first time almost, that I know that it's there for me. I know that I can do it. I know that there are tools there, but why is it so hard for me to do it?
So get into jail free cards are ways effectively of thinking about ourselves, thinking about our lives, thinking about the world around us that guarantee us to be stuck. It's like in fact, during this lockdown, we've been playing quite a lot of Monopoly with the kids. And as a funny aside, I have I've been joking with my creative team around this, that I have quite a competitive side to my nature, and we were playing Monopoly quite a lot, and I was winning quite a lot. And my wife took me aside and said, "You know, darling, the kids don't want to play Monopoly with you anymore. So you need to just be a little bit less competitive," and which I have done. My achiever pattern's been reined in, and that's gone better. But that wasn't the point I was going to make. The point I was going to make is in Monopoly, we have these get out of jail free cards. These are cards that you get, I think, on the Chance or Community Chess Square that mean if you get sent to jail, the card gets you out of jail. This idea of get into jail free cards is a sort of the opposite. It's ways of thinking, as I say, about ourselves, our lives, the world around us, that guarantee that we feel stuck. Things like, I don't have what it takes to change. Like, I don't have the substance it takes to be able to do this. If we believe that about ourselves, if we really hold that belief to be true, we're probably not going to do the things that we need to do for things to be able to change. It's like it causes us to feel more stuck. I'm not one of these people that believes in positive thinking in the sense that you just have to believe that things can change and they kind of magically change. I remember there was a film, it must have been sort of 15 years ago, called The Secret. There's this kid dreamed of having a bike, and this bike appears. And it's a nice idea. That's not how my life has worked out. But what I do believe is what we believe determines the actions that we take. If we don't believe things are going to change, we're not going to take the actions in the first place that might create change. And if we don't take those actions, things don't change, we reconfirm the belief that we have. The impact of these get into jail free cards is they cause us to be fundamentally imprisoned. They cause us to be guaranteed to be stuck in our lives. Other examples might be, I'm just not that kind of person. Or no one ever supports me. I always have to do it by myself. Or my life can't change. I've tried everything. When it comes to working with get into jail free cards, well, firstly, I'm curious, do any of these resonate with you or something similar? I probably say this in every single episode. If you can see it, you don't have to be it. Awareness that we have these get into jail free cards is already a significant step towards being able to break free of them. If we can see it, we can go, hang on a second, is that actually true? In the Reset program, we go through a series of exercises and processes to help challenge and break and loosen the grip of these ways of thinking. But I think a simple way of looking at it is, if you can collect evidence that contradicts the belief, it loosens the grip of the belief. Another way of thinking about it, these beliefs or these get into jail free cards are like the top of a table. The evidence that holds up that belief are the legs on the table. So the belief that there's no one to support me. This is one of the sort of a theme that I'm working on a little bit with Katie, that she sort of has a tendency to push the world away and to feel like she has to sort of do it on her own. And part of what I think is quite precious about the relationship she's developing with me therapeutically is that she's allowing me into her world. We're building a therapeutic trust in that relationship. But if we have a belief that I always have to do it by myself, maybe we've got evidence like legs for that tabletop belief of previous relationships where we've been needy and vulnerable and been rejected. Maybe that's with parents or siblings or friends or spouses or whatever it may be. Challenging that belief, yes, we have to have the awareness, but we want to break the habit of the belief. We need to go out and collect the evidence that challenges that. By having experiences that kind of contradict the get into jail free cards, that will help loosen them. The more of those experiences we have, it's almost like we're taking the legs from under that table, or we're building a new tabletop, the belief that people are there to help and support me. And then we're going out and we're gathering the legs, we're gathering the evidence for that new tabletop. In some ways, that's part of what's happening for Katie therapeutically. That's part of the therapeutic process, that we build a new sense of trust and support, new habits in our life that initially can take a lot of courage and a lot of discipline to put in place, but then they start to become more stable and more solid. So I'm curious, what get into jail free cards do you have? Maybe you want to comment if you're watching this on YouTube, comment below the video. What are some of the ways that you recognize that you think about yourself, your life, the world around you that cause you to feel stuck? So one of the other themes that's been coming out in recent episodes is the theme of the inner child. And during one of the exercises that I did with Katie, she realized that she'd been ignoring her inner child. Here's a clip from that episode.
See that little girl that you feel in there, which feels, well, how does she feel? If you were to describe the feelings that she has right now, what would they be?
Oh, it's just like I always say, just so unheard and so misunderstood, so full of love to give.
But wanting to receive. How does it feel for the little girl when you just right now acknowledge her, that we give her some space and she's invited into this room? What does that feel like?
That I'm a troublemaker. I'm a difficult person. I'm causing trouble.
Is that how she feels, or is that what you tell yourself?
That's what she feels.
So she feels that when she shows herself and when she expresses herself, that she's being a troublemaker and she's causing trouble.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true? I know that's how she maybe feels, but what, do you think that's true?
No.
So what is the inner child? As it happens, we did quite a popular post on my Instagram page recently talking about this. That's a really good place as a side comment to go to if you want to understand more about the key ideas and principles in my philosophy. We really try to break it down into sort of simple bite-sized pieces on my Instagram. So do go and check that out as a way of sort of following on this journey together. But ultimately, the inner child is that younger, more vulnerable, more emotionally sensitive aspect of ourselves. We all have an inner child. It's just how much we're in relationship with and in contact with that part of us. When we've learned to criticize, to reject, to judge, to feel like we have to always be an adult, we've learned to value sort of doing and achievement more than being in connection. This childlike part of us becomes sort of locked in the basement of our psyche. Like it's sort of, you don't ultimately destroy it. You might feel like you destroy its will sometimes, but it doesn't have the sort of presence and the sort of space that it needs. And there are real consequences to that. We lose touch with our sense of spontaneity, of joy, of playfulness. It's very hard to be fully connected in the moment when we're rejecting parts of ourselves. An inner child that's being rejected and we're not in balance with is also one of the biggest sources of sabotage in our life. It's almost like we push it away and we're disciplined. Like let's say you're on a program to change what you're eating. And let's say you're really rigid and sort of really kind of ruthless with yourself about it. Maybe you can sustain that for a few weeks, maybe a few months, but after a while, that inner child is getting like super frustrated and pissed off. Like it just wants a slice of cake, or it wants a biscuit, or it wants to have an evening a week, or an evening every fortnight where it can have ice cream, whatever it might be. The more we repress and we suppress that part of us, in the end, it has a tantrum. And that often looks like not just having a slice of cake, but the whole cake, or it's not just forgetting to meditate once, it's completely sabotaging the whole program that we've been on. We have to learn to work in a collaborative way, in a way where we cultivate and we build and we nurture the relationship with that part of us. And it's one of the things that you'll see in the more popular psychology work that's out there with the inner child. There's a lot of it's about sort of making contact with and allowing and making space for. And I think that work is really important. What I'm about to say is not to negate the value of that work. But the danger is that it's almost like a pendulum, like the inner child has been too far restricted, and then it swings the other way. And suddenly we lose the ability to be disciplined, to follow through, to be good to our word, to be consistent in our lives. We need a balance of two different qualities of parenting, ultimately, with our inner child. What I'm about to say is not meant in any sort of gender stereotypical way. It's just how traditionally these things have been done. There's the more traditionally feminine quality, but of course, men need to be in touch with feminine qualities, and these things are much more loosely held these days. But the more traditional, feminine, nurturing, loving, holding, supportive, I adore you as you are. You're perfect as you are. I love you as you are. Even down to the sort of female genitalia, it's receptive. It's allowing something to penetrate, to come in, to allow, to hold and support. Then we have the more masculine, traditionally masculine quality. The you've got what it takes. You can do this. This is the boundary. That's not okay. I love you enough to hold this boundary. The more then typically down to, again, genitalia, sort of phallic, pushing forwards quality. Children need both. Children need, you are perfect as you are. I adore you. I love you. And you've got what it takes. Go do this. You've got this. They need holding and they need push. They need acceptance and they need challenge. They need love and they need boundaries. Same is true with your own inner child. It needs both. And sometimes the problem is not that our inner child is being repressed and rejected. The problem is our inner child is running the show. And we're acting in a childish, petulant, sort of grumpy, moody way. And actually, we need more boundaries. We need more of actually, that's not okay to treat yourself or other people, whatever it may be, in that way. So this is not meant to be a sort of comprehensive teaching on the inner child. We will revisit these themes in these episodes, and you'll see it developing at various points in the sessions that I do with the participants as well. There were some interesting episodes in season 1 where we explored the inner child as well. But I just wanted to give some frames of reference so you have a bit more of an understanding of what it is that Katie and I are talking about and why this aspect, why this quality is so important. And I'm curious, on reflection, what's your relationship like with your inner child? Like, as you hear me talk about this sensitive, vulnerable, emotionally rich and alive part of yourself, is that something that's allowed in your life? Does it need more space, or is it taking up too much space? Does it actually need some more edges and some more boundaries? So I want to come to some of your questions now. And Jill asked, thank you, Katie, for sharing your story. Alex, thank you for the session. Feeling unsafe as a child moves into adult life. How does it show up in adult life? Defenses, armor, fight, flight. So definitely feeling unsafe as a child, particularly if we haven't cultivated that sense of inner holding and safety subsequently, will change many and impact many things in our lives. And those shapes and impacts are different for different people. One of the things that I have a strong emphasis on is dealing with our traumas in the past is important, and trauma often gets held in our body. And so metabolizing and digesting and processing that is really important. But actually, often the bigger impact is not the trauma that's held in the body. It's the behaviors that have been conditioned and set up by that trauma, which are now being lived through our life. So for example, we learned when I feel scared, I deal with that by disconnecting into my mind, and I try to think my way to a feeling of safety. The problem is you can't think your way to a feeling of safety. The more you try to do that, the more you disconnect, the more anxious you get, the more unsafe that you feel. So understanding these sort of ways we've learned to respond to our traumas, the patterns, the programs that have got in place is very important, because it's those that are causing our suffering now. So it's beyond the scope of just have a few minutes to answer a question here to go into sort of kind of comprehensive map of different ways that we get patterned. But just for yourself, seeing how you've learned to respond to yourself emotionally probably has origins in childhood, and it perhaps doesn't have to be that way. And creating change may well be creating change in that dynamic. A few other questions. Katie's episode talked about grounding and why is that important. So we've got a video coming out on Sunday, which is going to speak a little bit more to this idea of grounding. But really the essence is that grounding helps us stay present, staying connected. When we're ungrounded, we're often caught in the past, in the future, in our mind, in disconnect, and it's hard to have clear perspective. It's hard to be in touch with our own feelings and emotions, and ultimately to feel the support and the holding that's there when we're not grounded. That's why I talked in a previous podcast around this concept of psychological scaffolding, why before we go into the deeper emotional work, I really emphasize building these foundations and these building blocks first. I think it's really important. Do we all need to have an awareness of the inner child to be happy adults? What if you don't have any trauma as a child? So does everyone need to do deep therapeutic work? Well, I'm a therapist. I probably think so, yes. But there's a bit like if you were to go to a butcher and say, what should I have for dinner tonight? They're going to sell you meat. And you go to a fishmonger, they're going to sell you fish. You come to a therapist, they're probably going to sell you some therapy. But joking aside, what I would say is probably no. Not everyone does need to do lots of therapeutic work. I think it's a calling. If you don't have, when people come to therapy for the wrong reasons, it doesn't work. There needs to be a spark of, sometimes it's a spark of pain that we want to do something to change it. Other times it's the allure that things could change and things that could be different. In terms of the idea, if we don't have any trauma as a child, I use a very broad definition of trauma. So do we all have serious PTSD or complex PTSD? Absolutely not. Do we all have experiences that were painful emotionally, or where we didn't get emotionally seen or held or met? Absolutely. And even those subtle experiences can have a real impact in terms of shaping our lives. And so learning to discover and understand those, more than just reducing pain and suffering, makes our life work better. When we're not constantly reacting and being triggered and in psychological and emotional pain, life just works better. And I think that's something, you're going to live decades of a life. Live them happily, as happily as you can. Live them well. Thank you for watching this or listening to this week's episode. I hope that's been helpful as always. Couple of reminders. Do check out my Instagram. If you're looking for little, as I mentioned earlier, bite-sized clips and reminders, it's a great way to do so. We just released on Sunday the story so far with Lauren from season 1. It's a great 2 or 3 minute kind of highlight reel of her journey the last 12 months. I think it's quite moving as well. So if you haven't already, do check that out. And we are constantly looking to evolve this channel. If you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast, trying to find new ways to bring these ideas alive. And so I'm really excited for some of the things that are coming up. And if you've got ideas that you want to share with us of ways that we can effectively use video to tell stories, that's really, I think, the thing that I'm so excited and passionate about. I adore my working as a therapist and the impact that it has. When I work with one person, I work with one person. What I love is to tell people stories in a way that can inspire others. So if you've got ideas or you want to support spreading the word, we always hugely appreciate that. Thanks for watching. Be kind to yourself. Go gently.